On today's episode, calculating annual expenses and how to determine your FI number combined with the most important financial lessons before graduating college. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is ChooseFI.
You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, excited to dive into this week's episode. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. Yeah, it's always good to be back here recording with you. I have to say, we've had a good stretch run here the last couple of weeks. I feel like they've been some of maybe our best episodes ever. It's kind of hard to say that out of 500 plus episodes, but obviously, I write my FI weekly email every week and I get a lot of feedback. And I've never had so many people say that one particular episode was their favorite episode of all time.
Wow.
More than episode 365. So I guess we called that, What If You Didn't Need to Escape, right? That was the subject. And the one the week before, we kind of named in a funny way, What's All the Hoopla About? That was kind of a throwaway. I was like, okay, that's probably a top 5% episode and it's got this weird name. But I think people are actually really excited. Well, first, just about the message generally. And I know you and I love talking about that, like about designing our lives. But in a very granular fashion, people were really interested in your gardening, actually. So I know I had a bunch of people write in about permaculture, which is not something that's on my radar screen. I don't know if it is yours. I know Zach wrote in about that, and Sarah wrote in. She has a website called permaresilience.com that she wanted to pass along info about growing food for our families and is near and dear to my heart, she said. So yeah, we had a lot of feedback. And then we got one from Cindy, which I thought was really cool. That is definitely something for you to look into and the audience, certainly. She said, my 1% better this week amounts to 100% better in that I use my local library to check out seeds to plant for spring and summer.
Oh.
Tomato and pepper seedlings were $7 each at my local Walmart, but now I have 10 packets of seeds and over 70 seedlings sprouting to be planted in the next week, ready to go.
Oh my goodness.
She said many libraries provide seed libraries across the country. Mine allows me to check out 10 packets per month, and these seed packets are normally $2 or $3 each. So this is actually a really cool thing. I don't know, Jonathan, if our local Henrico County Library does that, but it's something worth looking into. I feel like we've had over the years, like different librarians. We talk, ChooseFI, friends of the library, right? We've had different librarians write in like, oh, you should check out if ... And it's like always these wacky things that local libraries offer. And it's like amazing.
Yeah.
I think kind of books and DVDs basically, but this might be worth looking into, certainly for you.
Man, I wonder what happens when you're overdue on your This is awesome. All right, so I'm not sure about our library, but we went to here in Richmond, we have a Lewis Ginter Park, and they have a festival of lights where they decorate the whole park, kind of at the Christmas season with Christmas lights, and they have a garden library there. And if any place in Richmond we're going to have a seed library, I bet you they would. So I'll check that out. And that is fabulous. Isn't it amazing that you can grow plants, grow fruits, grow vegetables, you can eat the vegetables, and then they give you the entire next generation of seeds, which you can then replant to make more. I mean, talk about, coming from a center of abundance. Permaculture. I like the word. I had to actually look up the definition as you were saying, so I wasn't 100% sure, but in my mind, to me, it means, or it instills this idea that you are living holistically with nature, right? You're integrating into nature, or you're allowing nature to have a more integrative process in your backyard planning and your front yard planning, et cetera. And instead of just, we talked about this concept of just exporting everything that you don't immediately need, you start thinking about what does the natural cycle of this actually look like? And so I went ahead and Googled, thank you, Google, the definition. Thanks to Wikipedia, permaculture is an approach to land management and settlement design that adopts arrangements observed in flourishing natural ecosystems. So trying to turn your backyard and front yard into a natural ecosystem. It's cool, man. It's a cool idea. I've been personally, I would say, yeah, I'm kind of moving in that direction.
Nice. Yeah, it's cool. And actually, it's funny. I just found another email that Amanda wrote in a couple of days ago. And she said, are you familiar with permaculture? It's so much more than gardening. It's a design framework for life. And I think it's very compatible with FI. There have even been permaculture-minded finance books. She said, the art of frugal hedonism comes to mind.
Ooh.
The Bible of permaculture is called Retro Suburbia, and it's about retrofitting the suburbs for a resilient, community-sufficient life. Anyway, I think these ideas are worth exploring after all the gardening and connection talk. So yeah, it's really cool.
Don't gloss by that. She dropped a little phrase in there I've never heard before. And it's fascinating. Frugal hedonism.
Yeah.
Like I've never even contemplated I associate hedonism with an expensive, lavish lifestyle. What does frugal hedonism look like? That's really interesting.
Yeah, that is. And I guess that's a book because she's writing it capitalized here, The Art of Frugal Hedonism. So yeah, maybe I can double back to her and get a summary.
Well, I don't know if I've ever gotten you to get your hands down in the soil. I know I pushed on it a couple times, but maybe if you're interested, maybe we could pursue this a little bit further and bring on some permaculture experts on a future episode and have them kind of just unpack this for us.
Yeah, I feel like it would certainly appeal to the FI community. So that's something I'm stating it now. Sometimes I say things and I don't follow through, but I'm in. So keep me updated.
Awesome. Yeah. So personally in our backyard, we had several pine trees knocked down and I'm trying to replace them with a food forest. We'll see if that happens. I don't even know what a food forest will look like in our backyard. And I started playing around with an idea of making something called compost tea the other day. So that's my own personal gardening progress diary or journal that I'm sharing right now. But I would love to find out what these types of experts have to teach us. So today, Brad, we have collected a bunch of questions over the last couple of weeks, and I wanted to give this back to you because I know we had at least two that were really thematically they tied very nicely together. And the first one was asking about annual expenses.
Yeah, so we got this email from Jeff, and it's actually short and sweet and to the point. And he said, when you say that a person's annual expenses are $40,000 or $35,000 or whatever the number, what does that include? Does that include real estate taxes, property taxes, or just utilities and food and discretionary spending? So I think this is a great question, and it actually ties in perfectly with an email that we got from Caitlin.
Caitlin actually wrote into us and she was asking, it was really more of a net worth question, but the connection between these two, you have to put them hand in hand. So in this case, Caitlin was sharing a win in terms of net worth tracking. And she said, we're in our early 30s. We've hit this number. And with that being said, I wanted to know about getting our investment accounts, to $1 million because that's the trick to retiring, right? And where should I go next from here if I'm trying to figure out how much do I actually need? So we're gonna take these two questions and we're gonna put them together. So Caitlin and Jeff, thank you so much for the question. So Brad, I'll give this back to you. Let's start with what's wrong with every retirement calculator that's posited by any sort of financial website.
Yeah, so this is kind of like my pet peeve going back. I get on my high horse here when it comes to retirement calculators, the traditional ones, the old school ones, and to me, they start with a fundamentally flawed starting point, which is your current income. So that to me is wholly irrelevant when it comes to what do you need to actually retire? Because for many people, it's at a time where they're making a lot of money and it doesn't take into account at all let's say someone's making $150,000. Well, they don't need $150,000 to cover their current expenses, their current lifestyle, right? That would be what you need to quote unquote retire. You need to cover what your life costs. For those people, built into that, again, hypothetical 150K are taxes at a reasonably high rate, right? Because we have a graduated income tax system. So the more money you make, that last dollar, that marginal dollar gets taxed at a progressively higher rate. And also, by definition, savings are built into that. Right, Jonathan? Like, there's no way if you had a 0% savings rate, I'll tell you, you can never retire, essentially. So by definition, that current income is the wrong place to start when it comes to retirement calculators or even thinking about it.
So that's what's wrong. So if we're saying that, all right, it has nothing to do with your income, that's the wrong metric for figuring out how much we need to have saved for, then in lieu of that, we're going to be focusing on expenses. How much does our life actually cost? And so to Caitlin, to your point, don't go straight to a net worth number yet, because just to assume that, without any other factors, basically says you need to first do some legwork first to figure out, is that the right number for you? If you spend $400,000 a year, $1 million in your retirement is not going to cut it, right? You're going to burn through that pretty fast. So it's tied to how much you actually spend. So we're going to start there. How much does your life actually cost? Jeff's question was much more nuanced, and it's an appropriate question to ask here. What should I be accounting for? Like, for instance, I'll give you one example, Brad, and I'll send this back to you. If you're paying taxes, federal income tax and state income tax based on your whole income, everything you're bringing home, in retirement, when you don't have that income, your tax burden will not be the same. It's not to say you won't pay taxes, but your tax burden will not be the same. And so, Brad, there's a little bit of nuance there, but I'll give this to you as an accountant. How would you sort through this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Jonathan. And I think the kernel in there is exactly how I think about it, which is, first, I start with, what does my life cost today? But as you said, what will my life cost when I reach that point of quote unquote retirement or FI or whatever it may be? And you do need to be, pretty honest with yourself of, what is this going to look like? Because there are some things that are going to change dramatically. Like you said, taxes can change dramatically if you're still making a significant income. And health insurance obviously can change dramatically. For instance, if you're making $0, right, you're earning no income, you're going to get subsidies through the ACA that are going to cover essentially all of your health insurance premiums. So you could put a big fat 0 in that line item for health insurance. So it is important to know, or at least have a sense. Obviously, you can never know precisely what your life is going to be like, but to have a sense of, okay, when I reach FI or I reach retirement, I truly am going to stop working. I truly am going to stop earning income. Or, oh no, I have all this stuff in the background, quote unquote passive income or real estate income or whatever it may be, that is going to put me over a threshold. So you have to have a sense of where you are. But Jonathan, I think to Jeff's point, ultimately, okay, what are these expenses? I mean, to me, it's really everything that would be an expense in your life. So I think his first example, right, of does this include real estate taxes? Does this include, X, Y, and Z? I think the answer is a blanket yes, as far as I'm concerned. So like, if I have to pay real estate taxes, even if I have my mortgage paid off, right? Like a lot of people think, oh, if I pay off my mortgage and I reach that 5 point, my house costs nothing. Well, that's not true, right? There are real estate taxes. Obviously, for most of us, I would imagine 99% of us are going to have home insurance. So while that's not a break the bank number, for many people, it's $500, $1,000, $2,000, right? So all that stuff has to be accounted for. It's not just, oh, my discretionary life costs $30,000, $40,000. It's, okay, imagine yourself at a point where you reach FI or retirement, however you want to term it. What is going out of your bank account? What are you obligated to pay? And then add on to that, of course, all the discretionary things, which you aren't quote unquote obligated to pay, but in order to live, you essentially need to pay that. So this is like a thought exercise to a large degree, but also you need to be intellectually honest of, hey, what is my life going to look like?
And I think we can have fun with a few of the variables here in terms of how you're doing this planning. Like one is time horizon. So, for instance, if for you, this is an intellectual exercise and you realize that you can get to this point of financial independence within, 5 to 7, 5 to 10 years, it seems like relatively near term, then a lot of the assumptions that you have now about your life are going to be basically, relatively static from here to there. Whereas if you're looking at a 20-year horizon, there is more unknowns about what that might actually be. So, I'm just talking about the level of confidence that you can have in your projections now and your projections then. Now, some things we can kind of bank on them rolling up. There's something called the retirement smile. Some things become more expensive. Some things become less expensive when there's two of you working and you're paying for maybe education or childcare or these other things. If some of these roll off because either you're both at home or your child is past the age of needing that particular cost or expense, that's going to roll off. When you go to retirement, at the point where you leave your job, are you planning on having your home paid off at the time that you leave your job? If that's the case, that mortgage payment disappears. That's a massive change in your annual expenses. Or are you planning on including that and paying for that on the other side these are the types of variables that we actually want to think about. You have car payments right now. You're going to be paying off your car payments. You're going to be paying off your debt, and then you're never going to go back into debt. These are huge swings in the numbers. So you want to recognize the things that are going to be static or maybe even slightly increase in cost over, an intervening period of time, like taxes. My property value went up and unfortunately my county noticed and they increased my taxes. I was like, oh, that one, can I get a second opinion on that? But even if I get a second opinion, it's going up. It's a question of how much, right? So, some things are going to go up, but others might actually roll off. And so what we want to do is, regardless of making this decision, we still need to assess everything that's going out the door, absolutely everything. And now we can start making these value judgments on what is the most likely scenario at a particular point in time based on our current plans, things we can actually control, and maybe what we can't control, but what is likely.
Yeah. And I think it's important to not get bogged down in a ton of detail and make it so that you don't undertake this exercise, right? Because I know there are many people out there that are listening to you and I talk and talk excitedly about, oh, we can game this out and game that out. And that sounds great to us. But some people might be like, oh, that's more trouble than it's worth. Clearly, like you do what works for you. But I think, Jonathan, your point of like, what'd you call it? Retirement smile, which is
that's like I didn't coin it. I grabbed it from Justin from Root of Good. He gave a presentation at a Camp FI around the retirement smile. And basically the retirement smile is you retire, you have the cost here, point A, and then it smiles, right? So it goes down after retirement, shockingly down, because all of the expenses that you had attached to work go away. Right. You had a lot of expenses that were attached to this work life that you're no longer maintaining. The suits you needed to wear, the dry cleaning that you had, the takeout that you had for XYZ, the driving expenses, the commuting expenses, all of these, they go down. And then at the end of life, maybe there's a lot more healthcare expenses, et cetera. So you see this taper on you have this tail end that becomes much more expensive end of life.
Yeah. And I guess it's easy for us to think about our work expenses, but to your point also, like there are different season of life expenses, right? Like I think about my kids right now, and I've mentioned a bunch of times here on the podcast that they're both competitive swimmers, and those programs are really expensive, and that's a good couple $1,000s minimum that we're paying every single year. That is this season of life, but certainly 8 years from now, that line item will be down to zero. And probably well before that. But at the absolute outside number, it's 8 years. So season of life, if I'm talking about FI or retirement, I wouldn't include that. So something like that, which is just a one-off thing, theoretically, it could make a big difference in terms of your FI number.
So the point you had there was appropriately nuanced, and I want people to really latch on it. It's almost like taking two snapshots. So the first snapshot is the gut check. It's just what approximately is my FI number? And you just very quickly just get a quick sense of your expenses. You don't need to do any of the deep legwork that we just talked about here. And we just say, take the cost of those monthly expenses, translate that into what it would look like over the course of 1 year. So monthly expenses times 12 is 1 year of annual expenses. And then take that number and multiply it times 25. So that would be your FI number. So if it turned out that you had $40,000 a year in annual living expenses, multiply times 25, that is the $1 million FI number that Caitlin was talking about, right? Easy to throw around. And so conversely, if you spent $80,000 a year, your FI number would be $2 million, right? And so anywhere in between, it's a continuum. Now, Jeff has probably already come up with that number. And he's digging down in the weeds and he's like, well, what is it exactly? What is it exactly? What would change this up or down? And so this would be the second pass. Jeff's probably already done that first pass and he's probably kind of already on the move. And now he's really trying to figure out what is the best representation of that number. And that's perfectly appropriate. And it's a good thing to do. You don't need to go straight there. Either one of these is directionally accurate, but it's like as you're doing more planning, as you're trying to really nail this down, what should you be thinking about? It's appropriate to consider going deeper and start adding these variables in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like you said about Caitlin's, that $1 million, I feel like this might be something that maybe a misunderstanding we've contributed to in some sense, just because it's such a nice, easy round number of saying, oh, if your life costs $40,000, then your FI number is $1 million. But that is not like the goal of the FI community by any means. Every single person will have a different FI number. because your life costs different than mine does, than different than Jonathan's, different than every other listener, right? Every other member of the community. So it is truly just a real simple math equation based on what does my life cost, right? And then, Jonathan, like you said in there, you multiply by 25 to get to the net worth amount that you would need theoretically to use that 4% rule of thumb, right? And we've talked about that many, many times on the podcast, but there's nothing that locks this in as like sacrosanct that's going to work 100% of the time. But we've had JL Collins on, we've had Big Earn on to talk about safe withdrawal rates, right? Like the 4% rule is just a simple rule of thumb as like a guiding light as I look at it. So again, it's not 100% guaranteed, but it at least gives you some sense of what roughly do I need, right? Because so you have a net worth and theoretically you can pull out 4% of that net worth every single year. And in theory, that number should last, or that net worth should last for 30 plus years, potentially in perpetuity, because that money is invested, hopefully earning 7, 8, 9% in the market. You're pulling out 4% of it. So assuming that there aren't any terrible sequence of return risk issues that pop up very early in your retirement, whenever that may be, in all likelihood, that 4% is going to be pretty close to accurate. Now, we've had Big Earn come on and talk about, okay, 3.25% is essentially guaranteed. Of course, nobody's ever going to guarantee anything, but he's run all the scenarios and something like 3.25%. The last time we spoke with him, which was certainly over a year ago, that was the number that he came up with. So, if you wanted to be super conservative and multiply by 30 or 33 times your annual expenses, that gets you closer to what Big Earn would say is as close to 100% guarantee as you can hope for. Again, not financial advice, nothing's 100% guaranteed, but at least it gets you closer, right? So this is an exercise to get you close to what roughly do I need? And then you drill down, like you said, to Jeff's thing of, okay, what are the minute details of how is this going to work for my own retirement?
Hey, this is Andrew from the ChooseFI team. Hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it after these quick messages.
So one of the things to actually, when we're going farther with this, is to talk about why. So we just talked about multiplying your annual expenses times 25, but like, great, that's fine. I know my FI number is 1 million. What is that at? If I have an annual expenses of $40,000 a year, then I know my FI number is, $1 million, right? In this case. And we multiply times 25. Well, let's talk about what that actually means. So first of all, if you had just in cash, big piles of cash, $1 million sitting in your house, not recommended. If you had $1 million sitting in your house and you were to spend $40,000 a year, you would run out of money in 25 years. That's pretty good. That's if you make a 0% return. Now, there's a tiny problem with this in that scenario, it's not inflation adjusted, okay, at all. So if inflation is going up at 2 or 3%, or this last year, maybe 5 or 6%, if it's going up, your money is actually becoming less valuable over time. So this 4% rule is inflation adjusted, meaning it is protecting your purchasing power. So we're talking about it in today's dollars. Your life costs $40,000 a year, and today's purchasing power, that would be preserved in most cases using something called the 4% rule. And so that would mean that you would have this $40,000 purchasing power for, roughly 25 years. Really, that would be almost a minimum. What we've seen with the 4% rule in almost all scenarios, 95% confidence, right? So what this means with a 95% confidence, Big Earn did these calculations and basically said you threw all your money in on one day and then over 40 years, what percentage of the people had a success rate, meaning you pick the absolute worst day to put it in the market and you test it every single day between 1900 and today, what was the percentage of success? And it was extraordinarily successful. Then he's like, well, what would get it to 100% successful, or 99.99% successful? And he's like, well, maybe do a 3.25% withdrawal. So anyways, kind of getting more into the weeds than what I'm intending here, but I want to point out two things. One, the 4% rule, as opposed to just keeping the money in your house and taking on all that risk of having it all there, is inflation adjusted. You're protecting your purchasing power. And in many cases, at the end of this period of your life, in many cases, you would actually end up with more money than you started. Because again, what you're doing is you're taking this investment, instead of it sitting in your house, you're investing in companies, a lot of companies. When you're investing in, low cost broad-based index fund, you're investing in a lot of companies that are doing work. They are producing and they are earning returns, and they are giving you, as an owner of the company, a percentage of that returns, usually in excess, in aggregate, significantly in excess of 4%, which means that when you take your 4%, which came to $40,000 a year, there's still more left over than when you started to get reinvested to make that pie even bigger at the end of your life. So many people, and this is where it goes to sequence of return risk, that first 5 or 6 years has a disproportionate impact on the size of your pie at the end of this window. Many people end up with more than they started with at the beginning of their retirement. How do you make a money-making machine for yourself? That's kind of the goal here.
Yeah, and Jonathan, the way you explained it with the not advice, obviously, of putting $1 million in your house, essentially under your mattress and pulling out $40,000 every single year, that's actually a really interesting kind of mental framework for obviously what not to do, right? But like understanding that, okay, you've got $1 million, and this would be in the wrong example, but it's very important for people to understand this, right? So you just took 40 grand out every single year. By definition, it's going to be exhausted down to zero at exactly 25 years, because you're just pulling out 40 grand, 40 times 25 is $1 million. It would all be gone, right? So that money was just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. But the two key points that you put in there were, okay, we are investing this money. It's not just sitting there under your mattress. And hopefully it's earning market returns if you're putting it in a broad-based index fund. So it's earning 8% or thereabouts, 7, 8, 9%, whatever it may be. And that is growing while you're pulling 4% out. So in a perfect world, if all went well, right? Like let's just say hypothetically, you got 8% returns every single year, you would never exhaust that money, right? Pulling 4% out, and also then assuming, which is the second critical point, is that it actually does index for inflation, right? So in the 22nd year, you're not actually just pulling out $40,000, because 22 years from now, $40,000, just with normal inflation of 2-3% a year, the purchasing power, which is the term you use, Jonathan, is vastly less than $40,000 today. So that wouldn't be a successful retirement if that was our plan, right? Like if the entire FI community was predicated off of this calculation, and it was, you're going to be poor 22 years from now because you're only pulling out the same 40,000, we wouldn't really have anything here, right, Jonathan? So I think that's the point, is you're earning this 8%, you're pulling out 4%, but it's adjusted for inflation. So there's some of that in that difference between the 4 and the 8%. And then there's also some, as I kind of think about it intellectually, like a rainy day fund in there of, hey, some years it's going to be better, some years it's going to be worse. Sometimes you're going to retire at precisely the wrong time, but that little extra buffer maybe helps you succeed or, get those extra couple years until the market returns start turning around, right? You might retire in the middle of a recession or a crash or something, but because there's that extra little buffer, it increases your likelihood of success. So yeah, I mean, these are really important concepts. And I don't know, Jonathan, honestly, that we've ever dove into it as deeply as this, right? Just from an intellectual framework perspective.
Yeah, I think we're hitting on it. We're spending the right amount of time on it. I would say, especially for individuals that are trying to get some nuance to what their FI number is, but also maybe try to get some nuance to what their drawdown can afford to be. Because, I mean, realistically, let's say that you kind of committed in your mind to a 4% withdrawal. So you have a portfolio of $2 million and you're banking on withdrawing $80,000 a year. And you want to know, in what scenario can I afford to, withdraw more? Like the markets have been gangbusters, right? I mean, maybe you got an 18% return over the last year or two, and you're only withdrawing 4. You're like, am I allowed to do more? Am I allowed? Like, what is it? What are the rules for allowing to do more, or for now saying, oh, the market's been brutal the last couple of years. Can I still afford to keep doing this? Should I be making adjustments down? Yeah. There are ways to account for that in your math. And so what you're talking about are flexible spending rules. And Michael Kitces did a wonderful job kind of breaking down how he would approach this. And we invited him on the show. It was episode 176. So you can go back and listen to that, ChooseFI.com/176. And he'll talk about exactly that. What would be the context in which someone that was withdrawing only 4% would give themselves a bonus the following year? Or what would be the context where someone was like, you know what, I'm withdrawing 4%, but I only really need 3, 2.5%. I could do less, and the market's not great at the moment. So maybe I would actually consider dropping that down a little bit. Flexible spending rules massively increase your ability to handle and benefit from volatility. So just wanted to point that out, that nothing is static. Your life is dynamic. Your circumstances do change. You want to start creating a framework, something that you can work towards. In Caitlin's case, having a goal allowed her to realize, wow, I'm actually getting really, really close. So how do I find out, what this actually means in terms of what my next steps are? And I think Jeff's question really highlights a few of the considerations when you add on to that, maybe a few of the options with flexible spending rules, and then some of the amazing work that Big Earn has done on safe withdrawal rates.
Yeah. And Jonathan, actually, back to that retirement smile that you mentioned about 15 minutes ago. So Justin Root of Good, you mentioned he did a presentation at ChooseFI. And I actually wanted to jump in and say that it looks like Stephen is doing, from my count of it, it's like 6 or 7 ChooseFIs actually in 2022. So these events are definitely back up and running. I think he's already had 1 or 2 this year. Possible I might go to the Mid-Atlantic one over Memorial Day. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's at campfi.org. So he has the whole list of 2022 events, and he just constantly keeps us updated. And Jonathan, since we're talking about get-togethers, our ChooseFI local groups, right? We have 300 plus ChooseFI local groups in 300 cities across the world. So if you're listening to this and you're not a part of any ChooseFI local group, your closest local group, definitely head over to choosefi.com/local. I know I've seen pictures and posts from many of these groups that are getting together, having presentations, having potlucks and things like that. So it seems like the activity is really, really picking up. I know the weather's getting a lot nicer here in a lot of parts of the US. So it seems like people are really getting together. So yeah, choosefi.com/local.
Man, if you are a gardener and you want to do a presentation on permaculture, you are going to be a superstar with these local groups. So very cool stuff. All right. Now we got this amazing post in question. It actually was on our Facebook group, and it just sets us up. I just love the comments and the feedbacks on this post. And I just thought there's so much content for all of us to be considering. That's from Dave. And he says, what are the most important financial lessons to know before graduating college? And 120 comments on this post. We can have it linked up in the show notes for this episode as well. But Brad, I just thought we could riff off a few of these and maybe add some of our own. All right, Brad, I'm going to take an easy one here. This is from Marion, and I agree with this, especially for a new hire. You get your first job. It is so easy to miss this or to take too long to prioritize it, and it's a life skill that will follow you. Start the 401k contributions right away at the first real job. Even at only 5% or employer match, then set aside a small emergency fund, create a budget, and throw every spare penny at your student or car loan repayment. So eliminate debt. So I'm going to focus just right away that start your 401k contributions, get your employer match, the absolute first thing to do in your first real job.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And don't let, certainly we talk about, maxing your accounts and this and that. Like, don't let that scare you off. The most important thing is getting that 401k match. So if you can put in whatever that amount is, 3, 4, 5%, if you can start there, that's great. Obviously you can do more, all the better, but don't let that stop you from taking action. So yeah, Jonathan, I saw one that's just really simple here, but I love it from Colleen, is understand how compound interest works and just compounding in general. And I know I've said before that one of like the probably 5 aha moments in my entire life, top 5 moments, were when I sat down in front of a computer and somebody explained to me, this is how an IRA contribution works, right? And at that point, I think it was like $2,000 or $3,000 you could put in each year. And I just saw that, if this grows at 8 or 9%, I'm going to be worth tens of millions of dollars. I did something ridiculous, like when I was 99, but like, it just seemed insane to me. It didn't seem possible, but that is what compound interest is. It's a remarkable thing.
Didn't your daughter, like you were doing the same example with like a national park, and she's like, I'm going to save up and buy a national park.
Yeah, I think that was pretty close. I'm going to have this many billions of dollars and I'm going to buy Yosemite National Park or something like that.
Future billionaires unite. Okay. So The next one that I want to talk about is, a large expenses that the new college grad or the new hire, you get your first real job that you're confronted with making, and that is cars and houses. For the cars, this is a little more nuanced because we live in a weird world where supply chains have made sometimes used car prices go up dramatically more in value than they were before. Brad, I just recently got a quote from Carvana on my used car that we bought 5 or 6 years ago, and it was nearly what we paid for it when it was like only 1 or 2 years old. Like, I mean, It was like, it only dropped like $1,000. So the whole used to new car market's just kind of like, it's bonkers at the moment. But generally, car advice: buy a gently used car that's already taken a little bit of a depreciation hit and drive it forever, right? Get one of those cars that's going to last forever and then drive it forever. Don't be in a scenario where you're going to manage the payments and every 5 years you get bored of it and you upgrade to the new one. Let's just buy something that you can drive for a very, very long period of time, and don't get a $40,000 car. Don't get a $30,000 car. You can find an amazing car that will serve you in between, $5,000 to $20,000. You're going to have to kind of make your own discretionary choices there, but whatever you pick, buy something that you can drive for a very long time and do it. The second one that is about the house. And I think with this one, I always remember Dave Ramsey saying this, and this always stuck with me. And I think it's a decent rule of thumb. Don't spend more than 25% of your take home pay on rent or mortgage. Now, there's probably some people that are living in a very high cost of living area that are like, in which case I would say, I mean, it's still true. Like, what does that mean? I don't know, but it's still true. Like, it really does hurt when you're spending 50% of your take home pay on your mortgage. You're house poor. It's very hard to hit a 50% savings rate when 50% of your money is going towards your house. You still have everything else. You have all your other bills. Before you get to discretionary expenses, you still have all of your other bills. Things feel very tight, right? That home becomes a prison. All right. If you keep that in mind, what would it look like to find a scenario where you could be spending around 25, let's say 30% is a stretch, 30% of your take home pay, no more, on your home or rent? If you can pull that off, and we know plenty of people in this community that are living for free, like through creative means like house hacking, et cetera. They've been able to do this for free. Admittedly, the housing market's a little bit hectic as well at the moment, but still, guiding light should have these principles. Try to keep what you're spending on rent or mortgage to around 25% of your take home pay. These are just good rules of thumb that will allow you to achieve all the other goals you have for your life without being house poor.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I've got a couple quick hit ones here. So from our good buddy Frank from Risk Parity Radio podcast, he said, get out of consumer debt and stay out of it, especially with regard to cars. Live like a student as long as you can. If you save and invest hard in your 20s, you can coast later. And if you don't, your future self is not going to be too happy with your present self. So yeah, that's spot on. Jessica said, automate savings from your paycheck and set savings, investment, debt payoff goals and stick to them. And don't let someone's portrayed life, keeping up with the Joneses, sway you to live outside your means. And finally, the other one that I saw here was Wade, and he said, don't charge more on your credit card than you can pay off every month, right? That's super simple, but how many tens of millions of people carry a balance, Jonathan, right? At 20, 25+% interest rate, it's very, very hard to dig your way out of credit card debt once you're in it. So, I mean, that is as breathtakingly simple, but as important as you could possibly imagine.
Now, this question was about financial advice for college grads. And Jay said, I think it's worth mentioning, don't go to a college that's going to set you into life-altering debt. Find institutions that are somewhat affordable, community colleges to transfer credit to a 4-year degree. Trade options or skill-based vocations are absolutely viable. Look into scholarship options. And for those of you that are already in college, you maybe kind of made your arrangements, you find yourself there, you're coming to the end of the bachelor's degree and you're having this, oh crap, what job am I going to be eligible for with my degree? Should I go back and get a master's or a doctorate? Do I need to get an advanced degree? There was some more advice on here, which I thought was probably helpful in that scenario. Try to work for a company who offers educational assistance if you want to pursue grad school. See if they can fund any of these additional educations or certifications that you feel like you need to get. Many of them will, if you can market it and show them how it'll benefit the company. Mine just paid about $3,000 worth of prep classes and exam fees for me to get professional certification. So is there a way that you can get more education for less through grad assistant programs that we've heard plenty about, allowing a company, your future employer, to actually pay for it, etc. You got to watch out for yourself when it comes to the college system right now, because the bursars department certainly isn't going to. The car, the house, and the student loan debt are the three major decisions that an 18-year-old will set themselves up for, and it will have the greatest impact on their financial trajectory from 18 to 40. 40 is about the time that it's like the next phase. What are you going to do with 40 to 60? But from 18 to 40, it's what choice did you make with a car? What choice did you make with a house? What choice did you make with college? And people can basically get grouped into the 3 or 4 categories, that reflect the variance in how much people chose to spend on those, different big levers.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Jonathan. And yeah, it's really hard once you're in debt to get out of it. Every decision is made then with that debt hanging over you. Right. And I think kind of my personal advice, and this is the advice that I've given to my own kids, is really don't inflate your lifestyle. You have to build in savings right from the very first. That is a line item in your budget. And for me, the most succinct way of putting it is a 50% savings rate cures all. Right. It's really hard to screw up your financial life if you have a 50% savings rate or anything even approximating that. And obviously, we've all made mistakes. I've talked about horrific investing mistakes I've made with real estate speculation and this and that. But because I had such a robust savings rate, I was able to reach the point of financial independence in my mid-30s. And a lot of that came from, again, not having debt, not taking on student loan debt, not taking on too big of a mortgage, not caring about cars all that much. But that leads to a significant savings rate. Right. And when you don't inflate your life, it's that double benefit. When you don't inflate your life, by definition, your savings rate is going up dramatically, and that time to FI drops significantly. It is really, to me, it's like the one life hack to rule them all is increase that savings rate as much as you can.
And this speaks to savings rate. This is from Sarah, and this will be my last thought on this one. Sarah said, learn about hedonic adaptation in reference groups. As your income increases after graduation, it is so easy just to start spending more rather than spending strategically. And almost to kind of cement this point, my wife was a third grade teacher at a private school for several years. And she had this girl come up to her after class and ask her, Miss Pycroft, what country club are you a part of? My wife's like, what makes you
normal question? Yes,
normal
teacher.
Question. Normal question. My wife's like, what makes you think that I'm a part of a country club? Or not? It was just a normal question. I don't know if my wife was actually, I don't know if that's an appropriate question just to ask, general people, but it points out that this was the norm. I mean, there was nothing, weird about this question to this girl. Everybody in her sphere was a part of a country club. And imagine from a hedonic adaptation perspective, that is your reference point. Everybody is, but you. It's all about what you aren't, what you're not doing. Life is very hard when that's the case. It feels like you're coming from a place of deprivation as opposed to choosing a reference group that values frugal hedonism. Going back to that loop that we had earlier.
Way back to that.
Right. Close it. And that's the point. When you can find a community of people that makes purchases based on value, that values skills and lifestyle design over stuff, life just doesn't have to cost nearly as much. And there's so many tertiary benefits that come with finding that reference group. It will inevitably speed up your path to financial independence. So get integrated and have fun doing it. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining us today. The fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.